listening to episode 125 of Mitolife Radio. I'm your host, Matt Blackburn. Today we have Adam Bergstrom returning to the show to talk all about sleep. He's going to be busting a lot of sleep myths. He's a contrarian among contrarians. So it's really interesting to hear his take on different subjects, especially with sleep. This has been something that I've been studying for over a decade, and I've been really fascinated with it and optimizing it. And it's one of those things where when you get into natural health or alternative health, it's the same mainstream recommendations that you receive. It's take melatonin, it's avoid sugar at night, eat higher protein or higher fat before bed, and at all costs avoid sugar or carbohydrates. And I've actually been doing the opposite. Instead of supplementing melatonin, I block artificial light at night with blue blocking glasses, especially the blue and green wavelengths, which suppress melatonin production. So if you do that and you mitigate that form of EMF, which is artificial light, then you stop suppressing your melatonin production. You can actually get deeper sleep that way. And in my experience, it's been restricting sugar that gives me the worst sleep. It gives me more nightmares and night terrors and the whole deal. I sleep so much deeper if I actually fill my liver's glycogen stores, aka eat sugar, before I go to sleep. So I'll let Adam explain it better than I can. We talk about REM sleep and deep sleep and the difference between them. Do we really need 8 hours of sleep? What are his thoughts on napping? When to eat before bed? Does it matter? Graveyard shifts, his thoughts on pillows, thoughts on cannabis as a sleep aid, sleep apnea, restless legs, peeing a lot at night, nightmares or night stallions, as he says, and all sorts of cool stuff. So here is Adam Bergstrom. All right, Adam Bergstrom, welcome back to the show.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm losing count. I think this is number 6, maybe 7. You're a return guest, and people always love hearing from you. And your information is really counter to what's shared, especially in the alternative health community. I was reading some articles on sleep, and it's like, take your vitamin D, take your omega-3s, do low carb, like pretty much the opposite of what you talk about.
I've been called a contrarian even among contrarians.
It definitely makes it more interesting for sure, because I think people, most of the narrative is the same, right? Like when you listen to these health influencers, I would say 90% of the information is the same. And I started to question that.
Most of it comes from the medical industry itself, because they'll say something's good, and then all the mainstream supplement industry does is sell them the same thing that works the same way, only like instead of statins, they sell them a rice bran statin. So it really is the same thing. That's why Ray Peat is so unusual, Dr. Ravisi, people like that. There are supplements that can be used. Vitamin E is an excellent one, but they tell you to take fish oil and things that promote estrogen and nitric oxide and all those things. They're supposed to be good for you, and they're just parroting what the medical profession says and doing a more, I call it light, like you have a beer and then you have beer light, LITE. That's basically what it is. You just kill a lot less people by the supplement version of whatever they're selling you in big pharma.
Yeah, I appreciate what you share, because like I think in an ideal world, we build soil correctly and get the right water and kind of grow our own nutrients, but it's kind of easier said than done, especially in today's, even the spring water, the well water is heavily inundated with iron, and there's so many more factors, right? Like it's a little more complicated now.
Yeah, it's best to do your own thing. Definitely, that's ideal, and that's what they don't want us to do. They want a centralized situation where we get it from far off. Many times, one person will be shipping a product to one country and it'll come back. It's the same product, but they're getting it from someplace else. It gets highly ridiculous, and there's money. They make deals that way, and the public is the one that suffers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And that's why sleep is so interesting, because it's like a free thing that people can do, but a lot of people are suffering from insomnia or waking up in the middle of the night, both of which can kind of be cured with sugar sometimes, right?
Yeah, they even have fancy names for it now. One of them, get this: advanced sleep wake phase disorder, or familial advanced sleep phase syndrome. That means if you go to bed at 8 o'clock at night and you wake up at 4, you're sick and you need treatment. Now, that means that every farmer in the U.S. or around the world is sick. Because I've stayed on a Nebraska farm before. We got up at 2:30. That's what you had to do. And for a brief time, I was a milkman for about 3 weeks. And we had to get up we started our route at 3 in the morning is when you started delivering the milk. So that means that all these people that are up early in the morning are supposed to be unhealthy. And actually, the main thing of insomnia, it actually is a blessing. But because people are on schedules, like cows, you got to do this, you got to do that, then it becomes a problem. Otherwise, who would complain about being able to stay up longer and enjoy yourself, watch your favorite movie, or do some work, or whatever you want to do, or go out there and milk the goats, right? You want more time to do that.
Yeah, because I was under the impression for years, like I heard this over and over again. I forget where it originated, but you should be asleep, I heard, between 10 and 2 a, like 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Like that 4 hour window is more regenerative than hours outside of that. Have you heard that one?
There is something to that. Yeah, especially the best time to meditate is 3 or 4 in the morning. To wake up at lung time. At lung time, your lungs are at the strongest. They have more carbon dioxide in them to deal with, and you can go into hibernation states. Now, Ray Pete doesn't like the term hibernation, but it actually can be done. And for instance, if you meditate standard TM, transcendental meditation, it's been proven that you will drop lactic acid, more lactic acid than 7 hours of sleep with 20 minutes of meditation. So that's been proven. They're not the same thing though. In other words, you do need some sleep or figure a way to be in a delta brainwave while being awake. And that's the hardest thing because people are trained to be asleep in that brainwave. But like my mentor, Adonal Lay, he just kept awake while he was in that. So that's why he would be sitting in a chair snoring. But if you tried to sneak up on him, he'd suddenly yell boo and scare the pants off you.
I love it. Yeah, I've been playing around with hypnagogic trance, like a flashing light in my face. There are people that travel the world. There's all these different devices, but I tried one, and it feels like it induces REM, like rapid eye movement. And I do 20 minutes on it, and I get up, and I'm like, I feel like I took like a 2 hour nap. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, I've used. You can get these blinking lights that do brain waves, and always I tell them, well, set it for delta. Oh, you want to go to sleep? No, I don't want to go to sleep. And why you put it on delta? Because theta is the big boy. That's the one that they say does all the things in alpha. And then basically, the beta brainwave is you're reading the book, and the alpha brainwave is you're writing the book, writing in the book. The theta brainwave, you're erasing the book. And in the delta, you're erasing the whole book. And in the omega, you burn the book and throw it away. So that's basically your brainwave setup. And television puts you in automatic alpha. It's been known. So you don't have an eraser. So all that stuff goes into your brain. I wish I was an Oscar Mayer wiener. That is what I'd really love to be. L&M has got the filter that unlocks the flavor. We're stuck with this stuff. We don't have to erase it. And they know it. The repetition of alpha brain waves is what makes you learn, but makes you hard to unlearn. And that's why you can't, the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks because they've alphaed you to pieces.
Wow. I imagine in the school system, then they use that brainwave pretty extensively then, right? The alpha.
They know about, they definitely know about the brainwave. You know, they've been doing manipulation like that since after the Civil War, but they particularly during the First World War is when they really got into it. George Creel and the Creel Commission, and he had Edward Bernays on his commission. There were a whole bunch of people who got into what they call semiotics and different types of programming, and they've been doing it for a long time. The whole current situation is set up like that because they know people don't use reason anymore. All you have to do is repeat something as many times as you want. Hitler put it that he's the one that came out with the big lie. He said, they know about little lies. They'll tell little lies themselves, so they expect it. But a big lie, no one surely would say that. And of course, that's how they get over it. The more preposterous it seems, the more believable it is.
Yeah, that's a good point. Wow. What about sleep chronotypes? Because I was looking up some articles and I found this idea. I don't know if you've heard of it, that you're either a bear, a wolf, a lion, or a dolphin. Like we have different like chronotypes.
That's a new version. Usually it used to be the owl and the lark is all they had divided it, but they've made other ones. Because some people do tend to go to sleep earlier and get up earlier, and other people like to work into the midnight hours. Some of that depends on when you're born. I was born at 3:42, so I adapt to either one. I'm either going to bed at 3 in the morning or I'm getting up at 3 in the morning. So that has a big factor. And by the way, the early to bed, early to rise, actually, they don't make good astronauts because to be an astronaut, you got to deal with other than 24-hour rhythms. And so they actually pick owls for that because they're more flexible. Your larks tend to be more healthier, except if you get unstable circumstances. They're not as healthy. Then the owls do better because they can do better with different time, more flexible schedules. Yeah.
Wow. So what's the cutoff time? Like if I was born at like 1:07 p.m., is there like, am I more a lark or is there?
You'd be more probably a daylight person preferring it. But that doesn't always hold true. There's other factors in the family and things like that, how they run it. But birth does have a lot to do with it. Actually, more people at 3 and 5 in the morning, most people die. That's the dying time. It's also the birthing time. Most people actually are born at that time. So there's a lot going on with the carbon dioxide there that both can either phase you out or keep you alive longer. It's a miracle element. The more I research it, the more I realize that the hospitals are killing millions of people by pure oxygen therapy. Even Scientific American now has run, I think they've had about 3 articles about it, how just one dose of oxygen can cause brain damage. And if you do that in a hyperbaric chamber, you may save a person's life with gangrene from diabetes, but you cause brain damage in the long run. And all you have to do is add 3.5% carbon dioxide. They actually have carbogen available in 3.5, 5, and 7% that you can add to it. No problem. Then you have the best of both worlds. You have carbon dioxide, plus you have the hyperbaric chamber, which can be used for many, many different purposes.
That's interesting. I wonder how much of that is like the iron overload, like worldwide epidemic, like because it really makes oxygen toxic, right?
Iron overload can cause so many problems. I forget exactly what they call the 2 different. One is supposedly genetic, which exists, and the other one is you're cooking in a frying an iron frying pan, and both are valid. Actually, with iridology, you can sometimes see it in people's eyes. If you take a magnifying glass, something like this, and look closely in an eye or a ophthalmic instrument, forget what you call it right now. I used to have a slit lamp. Then you'll see what looks like a bunch of black spots in the iris, almost like a swarm of bees in various places. And by the time you see that in the eyes, though, it means liver damage, congestive heart failure, all kinds of things like that. And definitely iron causes a lot of premature deaths.
Wow. What do you think about incline bed therapy? Because I did that for years, but then I started sliding, like waking up at the bottom of the bed, so I stopped doing it. Do you think
Oh,
that
yeah,
has validity?
the slanted sleeping. I'm the other way. I'm for slanting with your head down
Mm.
because up, but it actually can make a difference in therapy. Like if you have a heart condition, it's better to sleep with your head up if you're lying on your back, and if you're and with your head down, if you got a gallbladder problem. You reverse it if you sleep with your head down. When you're on your stomach. So there are actually different protocols for sleeping, and it'd be good to test that out. Muscle testing can be inaccurate, but sometimes it can help you. So if you've got nothing else, then you use muscle testing to see which is best for you. But basically, if you look at the iris, you will see people develop something called the arcus senellus, or the salt line on top of their eyes. It's white. It particularly occurs in brown-eyed people more than blue-eyed people. It's more noticeable. And then you'll see something at the bottom. This is like a sediment because by gravity, all the millimeters of mercury pressure goes to the feet if you stand still. So by going upside down, you shake that up. And if you lived upside down, you'd end up with the arcus senellus on the bottom of the eye instead of the top of the eye. So it makes sense to shuffle that around. Kids do that normally with somersaulting, hanging by their legs from tree branches or monkey bars and things like that. And adults just don't do it. So they stand vertical like this, and all the material runs to the bottom of the iris, to the bottom of the body, down to the feet. And that's why we die from the feet up. The feet will start to get numb. And people don't realize it, but when they're asleep, their consciousness goes upward. In other words, their feet fall asleep first, and then they go up to the brain. So if you wake up, and I have done this before, in the morning, and you're totally paralyzed, you're in a delta state of consciousness. The first time it happened to me, it freaked me out. I thought I had polio. I woke up, I couldn't wiggle a finger or a toe. And then gradually, I started coming to where I could actually wiggle my toes, then my fingers, and finally I was okay. Now, by synchronicity, or perhaps he knew, my mentor, Adonal Lay, started telling that's what happens to you. Sometimes you'll wake up before you're supposed to wake up in the paralyzed state of delta. So then when it happened to me the second time, and it's only happened to me twice, I wasn't freaked out about it. I was paralyzed. It was kind of enjoyable. The next step is what they call nirva kapha samadhi in yoga, where you take that paralyzed body and you walk with it while you're still paralyzed, because you're using the environment, something called cosmodyne force versus something called kundalini force. Kundalini force has to do with the spine and the sperm. It comes from the sperm. If you look at the spine, it's got a wiggly tail called kundalini, and it's got a head called the medulla oblongata, and it inserts into the brain, which is the ovum. It's just a big ovum. It's the same thing. If you look at it, it's comical. You have a round head, and then the sperm inserted. So we have a sperm hanging on to an ovum.
That's really interesting. I never thought about it like that. That makes sense.
Yeah. Now
And
the sperm will drop. The head inserts and the tail drops off, but then it just grows back by the programming, because all the sperm have is the programming. It's like it's so tiny. It's like the sun and a comet are actually the analogy of it in the solar system. If you think about it, the sperm comes in to feed the sun, and then backs off. But the sperm is the spine is actually what's called the chakra system, but then the realm system starts in the center of the forehead and goes back to the medulla oblongata. That is actually the true chakra system, and the rest is a reflex to it in the sperm. So yogis can meditate and get up to this area, and they haven't accomplished anything when you can start here and go back. And that is called the audible life stream, and some of those ideas are valid. They actually can happen, and by meditating, and even it can happen in sleep, you will hear a buzz in your ears, so to speak, to start with, and it goes over to the right ear, and then it goes to the center of the forehead. So I once had a chiropractor come to me and complain, you're not going to believe this, but I hear a sound bugging me all day, and it's in the center of my forehead. And I said, well, I was told by my teacher, it took me 18 years to get there, so I'm not going to cure you of it.
wow, so it's a superpower. You made me think with the foot fall asleep thing. When I was in theater before rehearsal, the teacher would have us all lay on the ground flat on our back, and then she would guide us through this like meditation. And she would say, relax all the muscles in your feet. And she would start at the feet and work up. And by the time she got to the neck and my head, I felt like I was almost asleep. So that makes sense.
Those techniques work. In fact, for people who do have insomnia, what you do is tighten the muscles and loosen them and go through that technique. When I used to take yoga, every time we got to that, I'd go to sleep. They'd have to wake me up. Yeah, it's very, your mouth, you open it up completely wide, and then you relax it, and even your eyes, you shut as tight as you can, and you open them up, starting from the feet all the way up. It's really hard not to go to sleep that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if I brought it up on our last chat, but I've been playing a lot with float tanks, like sensory deprivation. Oh yeah, I think we talked about John Lilly and stuff. And I don't have it yet at my new spot. I'm gonna have one up here at some point, but I probably breached over 50 floats. And what's interesting is you can't fall asleep in that. Like even though you're so relaxed, I think that's where that technology works, is because you're fully relaxed, but it's pretty much impossible to fall asleep, at least for me. And that's where I think you can go into deeper states of consciousness.
Well, sleep is the way to genius or savants too. It's like we think we have to develop certain brain functions, but actually the brain comes from without. Look at these examples of people like the guy in Denver. He jumps into the pool, there's no water in it, hits his head, suddenly he's a mathematical genius. And they took this mathematical whiz down there in San Diego, and they put him in a brain scan because they wanted to see if the areas that are associated with math had grown. No, he was using his eyes. That's why behavioral optometry is a science of the eyes, where you just train your eyes and you become smarter. I showed someone how to, I tested a friend of mine's daughter. And when you do the eye test, if they don't go over smoothly, you have a problem. She was a D student. So I told her, you live in Hollywood, you have plenty of money, find a behavioral optometrist and get her trained. And so they did. She became an A student from, I think I saw her when she was in ninth grade. All the way through high school, she was an A student. She became an A student throughout college and is now in the movie industry, last I heard. So
Wow.
Makes a big difference.
You're making me think back to when I got pulled over in California like 3 years ago or something. And it was just in the middle of the night, but I wasn't drunk or anything. And they did the eye. You had me follow his finger or flashlight with my eyes. And fortunately, I was okay, even though I was really tired.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. You can see when it jumps, people do two things. When you move their finger across their vision, they will follow it by moving their neck. And that means they can't really do it. The other thing is it'll jump. And in her case, my friend's daughter's case, it jumped severely. And that can affect your tennis swing. It can affect if you're lifting weights with both hands, one will tend to go up faster than the other and interfere with your weightlifting protocols and things like that. So it really does make a big difference. And it can train you to go to sleep because all creativity comes with a loose brain. That's why so many people wake up in the morning with an inspiration. When you think of the word, it means a breath. You inspire, and you expire means to die too. So actually, if you inspire, you're in your body, and when you expire, you astral project or
Wow.
you dream. Either case.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about dreaming because I would say most nights I don't remember my dreams. I remember them last night, but it's pretty rare. Have I heard you say like you don't need to remember your dreams, or ideally you get to a dreamless state?
Yeah, the dreamless states are okay, except when you repress them. And the way you can tell, you more or less have to go to a sleep lab because if you have the eye movements of REM, they call it, rapid eye movements, then you're dreaming. That's how they can tell in a sleep lab. But if you don't have those movements, then you're a yogi. That's called turiya, Turiya, and it's the dreamless state. Because if you don't have any traumas, you don't have anything to take care of. Dreams actually have a lot to do with if we did something in our waking life that we really weren't on board with. How can I explain this better? Then the dream will come and correct it or self-correct. So that's why almost every dream that you have is actually set off by the previous day within 24 hours. It might take you back to your childhood to give you a lesson like that, but it's always good to understand a dream. Find out what set it off the day before you had that dream. And inevitably you will find it. That's called the Charters effect. Ann Charters was a dream researcher back in the 80s, probably 70s, 80s. And she wrote two books, Dream Power and Dream Something Else. And the second book she wrote about Edgar Cayce being so accurate about dreams. He really did some interesting dream research that the scientists realized that how did he get a hold of this stuff anyway? Well, he got it in his dreams. He got it actually being in more of like a mesmeric or hypnotic state is how he got it.
Wow, that's interesting because these sleep trackers are really popular now. Like you have the Aura Ring, Whoop, there's the Apple Watch that like track your sleep and will show you like the time that you're in like REM and deep sleep. I think those are the main two categories, and then awake. And I've heard, and it kind of makes sense with what you're saying, that REM, I've heard, regenerates like the mind, and deep sleep regenerates the body. Do you say that's somewhat accurate, or?
That's somewhat accurate. Yeah, you're to regenerate the body it takes a delta. In fact, according to my sources, that you stop aging at that point when you're in REM, when you're in delta. That's why Adonal Lay had us. He said, "Be in delta all the time. You don't want to even be in REM." In fact, one time he used to keep me up all the time deliberately. And one time we were driving back from Mississippi or someplace like that back to Texas, up all night for 2 days. And I said, I feel pretty good, but my brain isn't working. I was like, duh, I feel stupid. He said, well, what do you think delta is, brother? You stop thinking. I said, so this is good? He said, yeah. And so in other words, in delta, you act, you don't think. It's stinking thinking that gets us in so much trouble in the first place. We put boundaries on ourselves, like I can't earn enough money, I'm going to be sick, and etc. And then we self-impose ourselves in our own version of Facebook jail.
It's a good point. Yeah, when I'm underslept, like I know the feeling very well because I've experienced it many times. It feels like my brain's overheating, like it's hot, and I think our brain's supposed to run somewhat cool, right, or to a degree. Um, and so, taking a short nap or doing like I don't know, one of my little audio devices, little quick meditation seems to help cool it down. But is that brain overheating? Do you know what
Yeah,
I'm
they
talking
can
about?
help, and also even vitamin B6 and vitamin B12 can help. B6 is a known dream stimulator, and B12 supposedly puts that color in your dreams. I experimented with them back in the day. I didn't notice much difference, but some people do, and they have a reputation for doing that. You can't get physical stimulations. One way to get dreams is go out in the sunshine. Uh, I used to have dreams while I was awake. If I took long drives and someone else was driving the car, I could close my eyes and see scenery that wasn't really there, was in my head, and see some of the scenery in my head was a lot better than what I was looking outside the window. So automatically, different things will stimulate our dreams. Also, traumas stimulate our dreams, but many times enjoyable experiences, swimming in, having the five senses, like cold water, hot sunshine, a hot pavement, things like that stimulate our dreams. Fresh air, scents of flowers, all of those things can help a person retain more dreams. Now, what I used to do is set my alarm clock for every 2 hours because we have a short term memory during sleep that is based on acetylcholine, I believe. And it just goes away. Like you say, oh, I'll remember that. And you wake up in the morning, it's completely gone because it didn't get transferred to the etching that etches the dream into you unless it's very traumatic or notable. So what I used to do is set the alarm clock, and then as soon as I woke up, I would be in the middle of a dream. You have about 5 or 6 a night. Write it down. Now the brain can trick you because one night I woke up, wrote it all down, and when I picked up the piece of paper from under my bed, it was empty. I had dreamed to protect my sleep. I had dreamed I wrote the whole dream down.
That's hilarious. Yeah, that's the only thing that's helped me to increase dream recalls if I write it down. But it's hard not to be lazy because you wake up and I'm so tired and I don't want to write.
Right, it's
uh,
difficult for most people. Now, I've had jobs where pretty much I had more freedom to do things, and of course you're in a good position now too. You can pretty well do what you want to do, which is really how human beings are meant to be. You're in a great position. Uh, Unfortunately, we make our livings off the internet. So sometimes I just wake up at 2 in the morning. If I feel like getting on the internet, I'm on there, and maybe take an afternoon nap or whatever. We pretty
yeah.
much make our own schedules, except we keep our food on a schedule. So we pretty much eat our oranges at the same time, our breakfast at the same time, lunch at a particular time, and the growth periods of the plants. And they can actually, what you eat can actually have a lot to do with what you dream too. And you put energy into the brain with your morning foods, and you put energy into your genitals with your evening foods.
Interesting. Do
If you want to
oranges play a role?
have sex dreams, you eat maca in the evening, or potatoes even, or ginseng. All of those there's a whole bunch of other roots have a reputation for turning people on. Onions. In yoga, they say, oh, don't eat those onions or garlic. That'll turn you on if we don't want any sex. Well, you want sex at night and you want meditation in the morning. That's my philosophy.
I love it. And what do you say? Oranges are for energy? You were talking about those before we started recording. You
Yeah,
love your oranges.
oranges are really good for the chest and the thymus. And if you notice, they're very similar citrus to a woman's breast. They even joke about grapefruits versus lemons and things like that. A lemon, particularly, the breast is a lymph gland. So if you cut a lemon in half, it actually has a little nipple and everything on it. And indeed, the breast is a woman's largest lymph gland.
Wow. You had me thinking about these like sleep supplements, and I've played with them. Even when my sleep was good, I was just let me try, valerian, skullcap, passion flower. They make these mixes, and what I found is they usually give me nightmares. Like, have you heard that of these like sleep herbs giving people nightmares?
Which did give you nightmares?
I think it's like valerian and like skullcap and damiana.
Ah, I haven't heard that. Now, Damiana, by the way, is according to my mentor, will give you dames. It's like a sex attractant, and believe it or not, now placebo works. I tried it once, and it definitely worked. Could have been just a coincidence. Yeah, Damiana. Yeah, again, I believe it's a root or it's down there someplace. It's at nighttime herb. You'll find all of them. There's a whole bunch of others that could come up with here in a minute, perhaps. The female version and the seaweeds too are actually sexual stimulants, like dulse and kelp and things like that. Spirulina. Spirulina is actually a representation of Kundalini, in fact.
Wow. I wanted to ask you, Adam, about magnetic pads and earthing, because I recently stopped because I was using it for like 2 or 3 years or 4 or 5 years, maybe, sleeping on magnets. And I think I overdid it because maybe I had some heavy metal detox. And then I recently went back to just earthing or grounding, rod to earth. I feel so much better. Have you experimented with all that stuff and sleeping on different things? And
I was told by Donald Wade, my mentor, that magnets separate you from the environment. So you may ground, but it actually interferes with the circulation in your body. Now, he said once in a while for a tonic at full moon time might be good to do that, and because you inhibit you get a change in your body, and changes in your body are good because we sometimes die from boredom. Many people just leave because they're bored. They don't have anything to do, especially retirement and things like that. What do you do? And then people kind of whittle away their time. Well, I'll go travel here and be a tourist, but they're really bored doing it. Even being in danger gives us some excitement, where we get adrenaline going. Hence, roller coasters, skydiving, all those kind of things that keep us going. But anyway, magnets can be good, and grounding comes in two levels. Number one, Wu Dang Chen, who I studied with, said you ground with your energy, and you should be walking around with 50 feet into the ground. You can actually do that. And I've seen examples of it. I've seen him instruct a student one time to you're not grounded. He said, if you do Tai Chi and you're not grounded, you're dancing, he said. But if you ground, then you're doing Tai Chi. So I had this guy do it again. He said, you're still not grounded, do it again. The third time he did it, I felt it in the back of the room. I could feel something happening. And he said, now you're grounded. That's good. So grounding is a very real thing. It's done with our own consciousness to our feet. And if you get grounded, you've probably seen those documentaries where you try to push the master over, and no matter how you do it, I've experienced it. I had a teacher for a brief time. I studied martial arts in Houston, and he said, push me, and you couldn't push him. He'd stand still. You'd lean into him as hard as you can. Then he would take two fingers, put it in your abdomen, and walk forward. And he had a big dojo. He pushed me like about 30 feet into the wall, poked me in the gut, and said, "Learn to breathe." So it's a very real thing. Yeah, I couldn't push him over for anything, and I couldn't stop this guy. It was like a wall coming at me, pushing me against. No matter how much I leaned into him, no way. My feet would actually slide on the floor. So, very real
wow.
thing.
Yeah. I remember in my Aikido class, my sensei would do stuff like that. I mean, I didn't do it for years and years, but he would push me and I would kind of reorient myself, and he couldn't push me. So I know what you're talking about. It's fascinating. It works for sure.
It's impressive things. Also, Chen did something else really interesting. He said, let's see, how was it? Oh yeah. He said, hold my arms, and then try to punch me. And every time I would think about it, or before I even knew I was thinking about it, he would touch me someplace and I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. He did it twice. And he said that if you're really adept at Tai Chi, you know the other person's move before they make it because you become them. He said you become the sword in their own scabbard. And they can't do anything. And it's really for real because I couldn't move. When he touched me, and he would touch at different places because he said your intention to attack goes to various areas. And all you have to do is become their attack wherever they're going to attack, and then you stop them in their tracks. So
Wow.
it's very real, very real. And hanging around with the Donald Lay, the same thing. As a friend of mine went up to him one time and said, when you were doing that demonstration, you look like you've had some training in martial arts. Have you? And my friend Tommy Liberto was his name. Suddenly, he got punched in the stomach, and nothing was seen moving. And Adano just smiled at him. And then Tommy, who was an experienced martial arts teacher himself, knew that Adano Lay knew martial arts to a level that many people don't.
I wonder if wild animals like elk and deer like have this automatically because they can kind of, their senses are always heightened, right? And when you're thinking about killing it, I mean, they kind of change their behavior sometimes, and it's interesting.
Rupert Sheldrake has done much research on that, and I can validate his findings because I stayed with a friend of mine who's a psychologist in La Jolla, California, and she had 2 dogs, and she could be like about half a mile away, and the dogs would run to the door and be barking. So I heard about that phenomenon, so I followed it. As soon as they came to the door, I ran to the front window and was looking for the car. No car, and then about a minute or 2 later, the car would drive up. So those dogs knew what was happening. And recently, our landlords here have a cat, and suddenly, well, we stick the cat. We take a stick and rub the cats, and they just love it for some reason. But I was sticking the cat in the middle of the driveway, and suddenly the cat looks and doesn't pay attention, but looking in the direction of a car coming. So I was just curious. Then the gate opens, and the landlord drives in. So yeah, animals definitely have some kind of a sixth sense. You've heard those stories of dogs being left off someplace and going 1,000 miles and finding their way home somehow. Those things really exist.
Yeah, homeward bound.
Homeward bound.
Actually, never saw that, but I want to talk about caffeine too, because that's kind of another myth that you break. Because you said you sometimes have caffeine right before bed, right? And that's contrary to everything you'll read online.
I know. Same with ginseng. The trick about ginseng is it gives you energy, but it gives you the energy gives you the energy to turn it off and on. Energy just isn't up. Energy works to go below. In the I Ching, they say the superior man is he who does not act. And so the trick is to save your energy and know when to use it and when not to do it. So correct energy or correct metabolism is off on, off on. If you just have it stuck in an off switch, and people make it seem like we're just stuck in an off switch. Now, if I have a lot of caffeine, it takes me a lot to really get my brain awake. But even then, if I'm in the right mood, I can just go to sleep automatically with that. But usually throughout the night, I wake up, and to keep the cortisol down, I take maybe half a cup, 4 ounces of coffee, pour some sugar in it, drink it down, go back to bed, go right to sleep again immediately without any problem.
Wow. So is the Cobalamin tonic, is that mostly a morning thing?
Yeah, that's a morning thing, and coffee pretty much is a morning thing. If you go by growth period, a coffee that's in a bush, which is Yemenese coffee, and it's really hard to get. Many so-called Yemenese coffees are not really the correct one. But Yemenese coffee is a bush coffee. It's better and more suited for midday. And your tree coffees, as most of the others are, even when they say they're large bushes, they're really trees. Both the Kona-type coffees and the various types, more suitable for morning. And morning in solar nutrition, is from 12:30 in the morning till 12 noon. That's a big span. That's half a day, basically, almost 12 hours. And your Yemenese coffee, which are called mocha. Mocha actually is one of the most abused words in the English language. Mocha really means Yemenese bush coffee, but it's used as a type of coffee that has nothing to do with that. And it's also used as a chocolate drink as well. So you have to be careful of when you go to get mocha, what are you really getting?
Wow.
Chocolate, by the way, chocolate and coffee go really well together. They balance each other out, and they all have different sources of caffeine: the bromine, the phyline, and the caffeine, which has a fancy theo name also.
That's awesome. What do you think about cold pads too? Because that's another thing. I just tried to simplify, and I noticed all these devices in my room humming, and not only the EMFs, but mostly the sound, and the fans would break. Like there's a lot of like these cold pads, which I think can have benefit in context. But you always read on articles like sleep cooler. You shouldn't be hot when you sleep. What are your thoughts on like temperature and stuff?
Temperature makes a big difference. Ray Peat goes into that a lot with the idea of you want to keep warm. Even Dinshaw Gadiali's son, what is his name? Darius Dinshaw. He was wearing a hat in an interview, and he said, "Why are you wearing that hat?" So I live longer, because keeping a warm head. Now, my teacher had a little different take on that. He said you want to keep a cool head and a hot butt. And that's what meditation is designed to take the carbon dioxide out of your gut and lift it up into the head to cool the head. Because when you think of it, carbon dioxide is a coolant. It's used as a refrigerant, not a heater. So, but you want it in the brain to keep a cool head. They even have that expression, keep a cool head. And that allows your thinking, because an overheated brain can be a problem. Now, Ray Peat and I may differ on that, but sometimes when I think I differ with him, he really thinks the same way, but knows that there's exception to the rule. Just like snoring is actually a sign of being a high delta, according to my mentor. But when I read a book on it by an expert, there's only one type of snoring that does that. Others can mean block the lungs, a bunch of different problems, congestive heart disease, on and on it goes. So you have to be careful sometimes about blanket statements and know which one. The best laboratory is our own body. So you mess with it like you're doing, you try all these things out. Even before you get a problem, then you know how to handle it because you know what's going to work ahead of time. So that's an excellent strategy to use the body and figure out what's going on with it, how it works. I mean, check out the operating manual before you just get the flat tire or the radiator goes out.
I love it. What about blacking out the room, like with light? Because I've experimented with shades and letting the moonlight in, and I think moonlight is like only 1% or less blue light. But do you think there's benefit to letting some moonlight in, or should you 100% black out the bedroom?
I think it's good to do the natural environment where you're actually exposed. I met a guy who was a botanist, I guess he was. He traveled all around the world, and he was so close to nature. He said it'd be raining, he'd just lie down on the ground and it'd be wet. He never got a cold or anything like that. When I met him, he was in his mid-80s. He'd been to Siberia, he'd been to South America, he'd been in the Amazon, he'd been to Alaska, all over with herbs, and he just slept out like that naturally. We've lost our ability to do that. I certainly have. I used to go out in the in the rain, get a cold, that kind of thing. A lot of that is stinking thinking, but it happens. So I think the closer to nature. Now, experimenting with a totally dark room, you ever go to those hotels where they have those drapes that are so thick that you don't know what time it is? And I find I get really deep sleep there, but I don't know if it's beneficial or not. And I prefer the natural rhythm, but there's something to be said for all that darkness too. Ray Pete apparently would have us sleep with the red light on. I'm not so sure about that, but a lot of times I fall asleep with it on, quite frankly. So I'm exposed to it a lot.
I remember growing up in my like childhood bed and looking at the pitch black, and it looked like so bright. And I wonder now if that was like light, because our cell's a bit light. I wonder if that was like seeing my pineal gland light or something. But it seemed like just stars in the pitch black darkness of the room that I would see my entire childhood.
Yeah, could be. We have phosphenes in the brain where you ever push your eyes and you see the lights?
Mm-hmm.
Those are associated with meditation experiments too, where you experiences too, where you see the light. And many people who do light and sound meditation call that the lower realms, and then they go up through the different sleep states. And usually they advise not meditating while you're sleeping, though. Keep those separate, because otherwise you interfere with it. In fact, I've even heard people say, don't read in the bed or don't meditate on the bed because you don't want sleep consciousness to interfere with the other. And whether we like it or not, our brain makes associations. Bed this and bed that. Sometimes I'll do something, and if I have something that I enjoy that I do with it, I figure this could kill the whole thing, and make me not do it. So a lot of times I attempt to keep my good experiences together and my bad, and then I experiment with it once in a while too to see what's going to happen.
What about alcohol? Because I think a lot of people say don't drink before bed, and you got me interested in the agave pineapple juice mixture. And I'm not addicted. Like I forget to drink it sometimes, and it's just I think the key is, if you're an alcoholic, probably don't do that. But it can have a benefit for, I've noticed, digestion. I've had it with like a steak or something. It digests so much better with that pineapple juice tequila mixture.
Yeah, I think it really does work. Sometimes I forget to do it, but sometimes I do it. I use the Hornitos because it's one of the least expensive, real 100% agave tequilas out there. I can get it at Trader Joe's at a reasonable price. So I mix it in, and as long as I don't do too much. At one time, I used to cheat on that back in the 80s, and my mentor knew it. In fact, the synchronicity, this happened one time. I found a little measuring cup lying on the shelf. So I looked at it Donald Lay and I said, should I just take this with me? It's like I'm not stealing anything because it's on the shelf right away. It doesn't have anything to do with anything. So he said, put it in the cart and see what happens. So they put it in the cart, and the lady at the checkout stand takes it through. And I said, well, too much. I guess I'm not going to see that again. So at the end of the conversation, she slams the top of the cart shut, and that thing flies up in the air into my open hand. I'm standing there looking at it. And then I asked the Donald Lay, because I'm eating solar, am I getting on time? And that's why, oh no, I forgot the important part. As I'm staring at it with my amazement, she grabs it out of my hand and says, I'll take that, throws it away. And so I walk away and I ask my mentor, if I was eating more on time after a while, would I have the common sense to hold on to that and not let her take it back? And he said, just keep on eating solar. It'll all work out when your timing works. So eating does have a lot to do with our consciousness and what we put in our food. We are not only what we eat, we are when we eat. And that has a lot to do with our sleep. Root vegetables really help for a good night's sleep.
Mm. Yeah, that was another thing I wanted to ask you about, like the macronutrients. Conventional alternative wisdom, they say eat high protein and low carb before bed. You would say maybe the opposite, or?
Yeah, I think carbs are really important. Ray Pete would agree, but the simple carbs are the better ones because your other carbs can interfere with certain things unless you put a lot of butter on them or dextrinize them or cook them to a fare thee well. The grains and things like that. Some of them I think are okay, but they do have omega 3s and omega 6s in, and sometimes it's better just to get the plain sugar. Like I eat plain sugar a lot, and maybe it's abuse because I've experimenting, so I take quite a lot, but it doesn't seem to be hurting me. And I remember, even though my father had diabetes, and I believe, and it killed him basically, he went blind and lost his kidneys and died at 54. So meanwhile, even while he had diabetes, I was going in Chinese restaurants and drinking my Chinese tea half sugar and half tea, and I'd have about 15 cups of those. So that must have been enough. I was probably costing the Chinese restaurant money in sugar. So it never seemed to bother me. Then I started hearing, oh, you shouldn't be eating all that sugar and stuff like that. So I kind of went in line, ate complex carbohydrates, till I found out it's a fallacy that complex carbohydrates burn slower than the others. They burn the same speed. So then I began to wonder, ate a lot of fruit though, and a lot of the fructo vegetables, like cucumbers, zucchini, yellow quickneck squash, things like that. And those are pretty good because they don't, the fructo vegetables don't want to defend themselves. It's like a plant says, here's my fruit, go spread the seed someplace, and they like that. But when you bite their hand instead and eat their hand and arm, they don't like that. We're not the favorites among the plant world. They're probably conspiring right now to get rid of us.
What do you think about beets, Adam? Because I've been wanting to incorporate those. Like I used to, cook them up with some ghee on a pan and have them at night. I know there's a nitric oxide effect, but it's probably kind of balanced, right?
Well, the nitric oxide actually comes from only beets that are not organic. A beet is like a bulldog. You feed a bulldog and give them all the food they eat, they'll eat themselves to death. Well, a beet is a nitrogen accumulator because it grows in places where there's not much nitrogen. You give the new fertilizers that they invented with Franz Haber, whatever his name was, then they just gobble themselves up, and you get a high nitric oxide beet. About 200 times the nitrates in a beet than you get in a sandwich meat that they complain, oh, don't eat the nitrates, and you worry about that. A beet has 200 times. Organic don't. They don't have the nitrogen to accumulate. So all a super beet is a non-organic beet. It's really cheap to sell it. So just eat an organic beet and they're fine because it's an excellent food to move your bowels. It has so many minerals of all sorts in, and it also is a teller of how your bowels are working, how fast they work. Instead of taking charcoal, you just eat some beets, and whenever they come out, ideally, your bowels are going to work where if you eat dinner, you're going to get rid of your dinner on the toilet at lunch. You're going to get rid of breakfast at dinner and lunch at, did I get that straight? Wait a minute. Breakfast, you're going to get rid of at lunch, dinner, and lunch at in the morning, God, I got that all mixed up. Anyway, 2 meals down. I don't know where
Okay,
my
that
brain
makes
is
sense.
today. I think I need more sleep.
No, that's great. That makes sense. And are you talking about eating raw beets, or would that be cooked beets?
The what?
Would you eat the beets raw or cooked to see that
You know,
transit
we
time?
eat them cooked. We eat them a
Mm.
lot. I chop them up, put some garlic in them, and a little of my special sauce made out of nighttime type foods, and that's how I eat them. But raw, I think, has certain cleansing effects that really do exist. I used to eat a lot of raw beets, put them in a champion juicer with my carrot juice and things like that. Before I knew that the carbon dioxide, I mean the
Beta
golly,
carotene.
carotenoids were,
Yeah.
and the carotene was harmful. However, I disagree with Ray Pete on one thing. If your system is working correctly, you'll handle carotenes well. I drank a lot of carrot juice. I never turned orange. But if you turn orange, you got a problem. They say carotenia, it's called, is natural. It's not. You're supposed to be able to handle that. And if you can't, then you should think twice about eating carotenoids. I don't eat sweet potatoes anymore, except for the Japanese type, which are pure white and sweet and delicious. So if you can get Japanese sweet potatoes, I highly recommend them. But I pretty much, actually, when I started eating the Japanese potatoes, I lost my taste for the others. They don't taste good anymore. It's like I lost my taste uh, for what do they call medjool dates when I switched to barhees. You ever had a barhee date?
Yeah.
Man, they're
Yeah.
good. Yeah, we eat them pretty much every day.
Yeah, I know the astaxanthin thing was trending. It might still be like for athletes, and that's a carotenoid they supplement like 12 milligrams, sometimes even more, multiple times a day. But that's like I've got it in my skin, and it stains the skin for days, like red. So
Interesting.
that's probably worse than the beta carotene, I'd imagine. But
Hmm.
I wanted to ask you about like sex, and I've heard from a prominent neurosurgeon that years ago he was saying that an orgasm creates instant melatonin production. So, if you're not blocking artificial light or you're having a melatonin issue, just having an orgasm will cause an instant surge of melatonin. Are you would you agree with that, or?
You know, melatonin, and I think Ray Pete is right about that, is a natural chemical that sops up our excess serotonin. But when you take it, it becomes toxic to our bodies. So I don't think I've never heard that before about melatonin and orgasm. Orgasm tends to release dopamine, as far as I knew, and maybe a few other chemicals, maybe oxytocin, although that's debatable. A lot of these hormones, they make stories up about them and associate one hormone with it. There's another one. What is the hormone? Angiotensin, I believe, is involved with orgasm too. But definitely, you change your brain with orgasm. And for people who want to increase their sex life, you work on two ways. One is the dopamine, and that's done by eyes, in other words, vision. When you see a picture of a lady, whether it's porn or whatever, that turns on that system. The other system is the oxytocin system, and that's done totally by touch. All you have to do is touch, and you get turned on. Both those systems, when they're both working together, then you get the optimum sex life. But so sometimes you need both the visualization, which is the generality, and then you need the specific touch.
Hmm. That's awesome. That makes sense. I've heard like a healthy way to get increased dopamine is being outside and exposing your eyes to ultraviolet and sunlight, because I guess that converts the amino acid tyrosine to like levodopa and dopamine. So that aromatic amino acid conversion starts with the stimulus of sunlight in the eyes.
Sometimes you honor the cycle, because I firmly believe that there's a reason we have the cortisol cycle drop at 6 in the morning, or be the highest at 6 in the morning. It's to get us up and help us digest our breakfast, The hydrochloric acid is on that time. But if you try to avoid it at that time, you dampen the cycle. And I think a lot of that is you want the cycle up at one time a day and down. Blue light actually times us, and it's ideal at 12 noon. It's not so ideal at night, except in small amounts. Now, starlight is blue, moonlight is blue. There's no red light in those, except in the planet Mars and things like that, you will find some of that available. And basically, we're surrounded by red at night because of what's called the red shift. What we see as black is actually red. So it's registered as a type of red light in our consciousness anyway. But anyway, honoring the cycles where you get the blue light to get the timing, and then, or even sunrise and sunset. A lot of times I get out and try to expose myself to the sun as it comes up and watch it going down. You ever see the green flash at night? It's available, especially down in the San Diego area where you used to live. We used to go to some park and watch the sunset. There'd be a whole bunch of people there with cameras and things. And in January, I would see probably 1 out of 3 days that had a really good green flash. And of course, you're seeing that because you're surrounded by red light, but our eyes compensate to make us see a world that is colorful with all the colors in it. But actually, if your eyes were just purely cameras and not brain work, everything would be red at that time of day. That's why you'll see green shadows. If you look behind you and you look really quickly, you'll see the black shadows are not black, they're green. They're the opposite color. So about 2 hours before sunrise and sunset, you're going to see orange. Everything is orange, then everything's yellow, and everything is blue at high noon. It's bizarre, but our color compensation makes it so. Experiments have done putting different colored glasses on. You can rewire the world by having a red lens here and a blue lens here, and you see actually an entire different world than other people think they're seeing, proving that color is in our brain and trauma is actually in our brain. So one way to get a good night's sleep or get more energy out of your sleep is to cycle yourselves through the following colors: black, gray, brown, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, white. Just like that, we recycled our brains just by saying that.
Wow. Yeah, and you just reminded me, I've heard, I think it was our last chat, you were saying the color of your bedroom matters, right? Like green if you want to have a baby, like fertility, and then gray if you don't. Is that kind of correct?
Gray will stop it. Yeah. And green will promote it. You have to be careful with green. And as strange as it sounds, Thursday is the time to procreate, the easiest time to procreate. I had a friend that was in Planned Parenthood, and she got pregnant one time when it wasn't supposed to happen. And I said, did you have sex on Thursday? Yeah. So I told her, don't do that. So she had an abortion. Comes the time later, she gets pregnant again. I said, did you have sex on Thursday? Yeah, because they weren't having sex that much, so she remembered. And I said, I told you don't have sex on Thursday. Green will promote it. And strangely, Thursday is tied in with the color green. I don't know if you've ever seen that. They say you're gay if you wear green on Thursdays, you know. So there's an association with colors of the day of the week. Monday was red, Tuesday with orange, Wednesday with yellow, Thursday with green, Friday with blue, indigo, violet, and black for Saturday, and white and pink for Sunday. And they actually do have a physiological basis because we have a 7-day week that is set to a circadian cycle called circa septum rhythms. And it's a 7-day immunity cycle. When a person gets bit by a dog and they get rabies, it takes about 7 days, from 5 to 9 days, with an optimum of 7 days for the highest immunity. And the same with tetanus. It has 7 days. So we can die from either direct infection, like a mouse gets bitten by a rabid dog. They die. It's a poison to them. Us is not a poison. Our own body goes into overdefense and kills it. and that's why it's cycled into circa septum rhythms. Then we have a 28-day backup rhythm, and we have a 6-day final immunity rhythm. Once you make the 6 months, you have your final immunity.
Wow. It's so funny while you were talking, I looked down at my shirt, and when I woke up, I was going through my closet. I almost picked green, but I chose blue today, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah, I got my blue on today. You do too, yeah. Right.
That's great.
Sometimes I break the rule. It's not an infallible rule, but generally it helps your brain recycle, and and I have seen people who have heart problems tend to wear blues on Monday. I've seen it over and over again. And when I've come back and said, "How come you're still wearing blue?" And I told you about that, we even did muscle tests to validate it, and they said, "Oh, I didn't have anything else to wear," and we have to be careful of those kind of excuses. Why didn't we have, the color to wear? A friend of mine once couldn't get pregnant. They were having trouble getting pregnant. And my friend, Greg Whiteley, who lives near you up there, he's the guy who said, I told him that she has trouble getting pregnant. He said, "What does her cabinets look like in a refrigerator?" Because they're almost empty. So I said, "What kind of mother is that?" A mother is cornucopia. She's causing it to happen. So I told my friend about that. They said, "Well, the roaches get in the cabinet, so I can't store food in there," and some kind of excuse for the refrigerator. So I asked my friend about it. He said, "Why would you live with roaches? You either move or you spray or you do something. What in your consciousness would keep you victimized by roaches?" So we have to be careful about our own consciousness, how it messes with our excuses why we can't do things. And I've had plenty of my own, so I know the story. It's easy to do.
So that's a form of birth control, to leave the cabinets bare?
Yeah, right. That's right. Hey, that's a good idea. Might work. Sometimes belief has it. Donald Lay made a type of bracelet, and he said as long as you rotate it on your arms regularly 3 times every day, you can't get pregnant. Now, the women I know didn't get pregnant doing that, so who knows?
Wow.
It could be. We don't know where the psychological ends or begins, or where the physical ends or begins too. It's one of those things.
Yeah, yesterday I was out because we have guys building our goat fence at the new house here, and he was wearing a copper band on his wrist. And I said, "Oh, what's that for?" And he's like, "Oh, it helps with my circulation and stuff." And I think he thought I was weirded out, but I was like, "No, that's kind of cool." But I guess copper would have some effect on circulation, maybe
They
especially
actually do. They're called zincs. In fact, hang on a second. Be right back. The people listening to the show, since your audio can't see this, but this is an example of a bracelet or armlet that has copper in it. And indeed, all of those metals work on various parts of the body. And copper and those other ones are called zincs. They use zincs on ships and in the oil industry because the metal of the hull of like a ship will rust. But as long as you cover it with a thin layer of zinc or other metals, then it doesn't rust because it's called a sacrificial anoid, and basically you protect yourself. So by wearing certain metals, they can act like a lightning rod to actually protect you from various types of environmental influences. It sounds really spooky dooky, but there really is some basis to it. And Donald Lay, who I studied with, was a corrosion engineer for the oil companies at one time in Louisiana and places like that. And so he knew all about corrosion and applied it to the human body. And after he told me about that, I went through all kinds of corrosion engineer journals and things like that in the library. And it's a very real science. So it can be applied to human beings. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Adam, let's jump into some Q&A questions because we have quite a few here.
Okay,
um, someone asked, do we really need 8+ hours of sleep?
definitely no. It varies. Now, I'll tell you a story. Uh, if a person, we have different levels of traumas. We don't realize our trauma level. In fact, recently I found out that I had a low thyroid. Explained what happened to me as a child, where if when I got to be a teenager, I would be a doctor would pull out a needle and I would like be passing out automatically just by looking at it. I realized that that dizziness from reading information in Ray Peat blog was low thyroid because I ate all this tuna fish. My mother gave me cod liver oil on a regular basis, that kind of thing. Well, now I worked at this health food store, and a lady came in and said, "Do you have some tryptophan?" And just out of curiosity, she looked really healthy. I said, "Yeah, why are you taking this?" "Well, I want to go to sleep." "You're having trouble going to sleep? You feel tired?" "No, I don't feel tired." "Then why are you taking it?" "Well, I live with my son and his wife, and I'd interfere with their sleep." So I said, "You can't go into your room and be alone?" "Well, yeah, I guess I can." I said, "But what would I do at night?" "What's your favorite thing to do?" "I love to read." "Well, why don't you read?" And she started crying. She said, "Oh, thank you, thank you." I lost the sale and she went off because she was a person who only needed almost no sleep at night. And again,
Wow.
my mentor didn't need sleep. But you can't force this. So when there is reality behind it. If you're feeling really tired, challenge it once in a while. See what you can do with it. But don't do it all the time because if it doesn't happen naturally like that lady, it can be harmful. And some people, it's like you're a bodybuilder and need more muscle. Then some of those guys sleep 10 hours a day. So, but don't take that as a rule. I think part of it is they want us asleep so that we can't check out what they are doing. So they'd like us asleep in all manners.
That's a good point about bodybuilders because you always hear HGH, right? Human growth hormone is released, I think, in the middle of the night, or there's like pulses of it when you sleep.
Yep. Now they can be again if they can stay in delta and be awake in the brainwave like a Donald Lake could, then it's okay. But most people can't. So you'll find I've known a lot of professional bodybuilders. I had a friend that was one, and definitely they need more sleep usually than other people do because they're using their metabolic energy to build muscle. May or may not be good for the development of as large of muscles as they get, particularly nowadays with steroids, which help with that, of course.
What are your thoughts on napping? Someone asks.
The what?
Oh, on napping. What are your thoughts
Yeah,
on napping?
napping I think is really good. They did. We used to do TM, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening, and they set up in Arizona. They realized that 20 minutes was the optimum nap time. So truck drivers would stop at a stop. They'd have a chair. You'd put earphones on, listen to pleasant music, go to sleep, and then an alarm would go off in 20 minutes because they knew any more than 20 minutes, it would interfere with the truck drivers driving. So they basically caught on to that old TM meditation thing. When you meditate with transcendental meditation, they say at first, don't do any more than 10 minutes. They say it's counterproductive. So that napping is really a good idea. But when you sleep too long, particularly in the middle of the day, you drain calcium out of your body. As much as 16 to 18 times the calcium will come out in your urine. That's why they used to have people in the hospital beds and they could barely walk. Then they get them up right away now because they knew you were losing calcium. I was one of the victims at one time when I was as a youth and didn't know any better and believed in hospitals. I was in a hospital and lost a whole bunch of calcium. And then the doctor explained to me, if you lie down like that, all your calcium is peed out. Space medicine has validated the same thing, only they're in bed all the time because they don't have any gravity. Once you go on your feet, you'll notice at the bottom of the foot is K1, kidney 1 meridian. You stomp on it up and down when you run, stomp, run, and you calcify your body. You in the highest choice. I don't mean like sclerosis.
That's interesting. Wow. Someone asked how early to eat before bed, and does it matter?
It really doesn't matter. When you think about it, rest and digest is what the parasympathetic nervous system is. Well, you're supposed to. However, for optimum digestion, that food would stagnate. It would be stuck in the stomach. So they used to call it a postprandial peregrination. What was the word? In other words, you go and walk afterwards. It's good to take a short walk or stay vertical because the hips actually are designed to go up and down and stir up the stomach. Otherwise, everything just sits in one place. And if you lie down, it goes on the wrong side. If you do go to sleep right after you eat, lie down on the side of the right side so that the contents drain into the small intestine quicker and more efficiently.
Interesting. Yeah, one question I forgot to ask you earlier from me is sleeping alone versus sleeping with a partner. Are there studies that show or case studies that couples live longer than single people because do you think because they're exchanging infrared and they're getting more of a benefit, kind of like bouncing things off of each other while they sleep?
There's a lot of controversy in that, and I think it has a lot to do with one's disposition. Some people just don't sleep well together, and others want to spoon together and sleep better that way. Now, I had an Indian friend because in India, apparently the woman drains energy from your body. And so he said the only way he would sleep with a woman is if their head is at your feet and vice versa. This way for polarity, he claimed. And who knows? Mahatma Gandhi actually slept between two young women to get their energy. People don't know that part about Gandhi. He did some really strange things.
That's interesting. Yeah, I read this book. What was it called? Reverse Aging by Sang Wang. And the part that stuck with me the most was where he talked about the far infrared radiation, that if it's just you just send it out. But if it's you and your partner, you keep reflecting it back to each other. And there's this mirror effect, so you get more energy that way.
Yeah, a lot of times also it depends on the person's so-called L field or life field, sometimes called an aura. A smoker will radiate twice as large than a non-smoker, a field. So these fields are very real, and sometimes it's a light leak. We leak light. You want to keep your light to yourself and use it when it's metabolically appropriate. In other words, again, we have an on or off switch, and people often don't know how to do that. It's like a momentum. The hardest thing is to get a car up to 60 miles an hour, and then the next hardest thing is to brake it. The same thing, when a person wakes up in the morning, the hardest thing is to get going. But then once you get going, it's hard to shut down. That's why people have insomnia. They're at that one rate. So you basically have to learn how to use the accelerator and the brake when you sleep. And that's a matter of individuality because, again, it depends on how much delta you generate during the day. And if you're going to be in beta, you're going to be worrying. You're going to be, or if you're thinking all the time, you're overheating the brain, and then you need more metabolic energy. So that has a lot to do with sleep. And the more a person, the less sleep they need. Actually, as a general rule, the healthier they are.
That makes sense. We had a lot of questions about graveyard shifts. What's the bad side of working graveyard shifts? And what are some suggestions to make it work?
Yeah, it is a problem to work graveyard shift. If you eat food on time by growth period, tree food in the morning, vine food in the middle of the day, basically root food at night, it helps with the situation, and you can eventually become so flexible by not needing sleep. If you get rid of all of your traumas, you don't have a problem. But most people do. In fact, the whole thing on circadian rhythm started before jet lag with shift work, because they saw a lot of people who did the graveyard shifts and the lobster shifts and these different ones they call them actually got sick and had all kinds of problems. A lot of that research was done in the Sepulveda Veterans Hospital. I used to have a buddy live right next door to the place, with Barbara Brown on her biofeedback studies, and it's a very real thing. So I'd advise most people to keep day hours if they can, and if not, check into eating on time to set regular time periods and make sure they get plenty of rest. And in that case, they should darken their room, because that is a point to have a darker room since our bodies are used to it. But you're out of phase at that point, and eventually you're dealing with what astronauts deal with and what a lot of us are going to be dealing with more, because now with computers, we're on a 24-hour day, all night restaurants, all night casinos, all night this. So our adaptation is important. Some people will phase out while adapting, though. But if we get rid of all of our traumas, then we can navigate through those type of shifts pretty easily.
I love it. Yeah, and I wonder if like wearing pink or yellow lenses, like glasses, could help too. So I noticed when I put on those, not only orange and red, but just the lighter ones even, my brain feels better if I'm driving or whatever.
I think they help. 9 out of 10 people, the 10th person gets time with red, and it doesn't really help them, unfortunately. The trick is to keep dim lights as much as possible. The worst lights are the kinds that those workers have to do on the freeway, where they have the 10,000 lux lights shining, where it's just like daylight. Those can really mess with your schedule. But if you keep low lights, night lights, Christmas lights, things like that, a red Christmas light is perfect to get up in the night. When women get up, they have found a link with breast cancer if they don't have like a very low light. And if they get exposed to blue light and light like that, waking up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, it's like a shock. The man who wrote the book on light, what was his name? John Ott. Mm-hmm. He took photographs of plants in the middle of the night, and the plants would close up suddenly. And so I asked Adano if it was with the light, and he told me it was the shock. I mean, what would you think if someone came and suddenly a big flash happened in your bedroom in the middle of the night, like a lightning strike? You'd wake up pretty quickly and be in some state of shock. So basically, it's a good idea to adjust to a sleep schedule like that. You really need to use common sense.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on pillows? That was an interesting question, because I've experimented with no pillow and then different style pillows. Right now, I like the one with the indent in the middle and like one side slightly raised. But I wonder if sleeping without one messed up my neck, because I did that for like 5 or 6 years.
I've experimented a lot with that. Vibrant Gal hates pillows, and I used to sleep without a pillow all the time. Every once in a while, I have a need for a pillow, and usually I find out it's when I'm more traumatized. Then it's good to have your head up a little bit. But the experiments I did, I never could sleep on my back. For some reason, I couldn't do it as a kid. So one day, I took a seashell. What do they call sundial seashells? You ever see them? Mm-hmm. And I put it on my forehead. This was back in the Pat Flanagan days. And I took a jar and put it behind my neck like those Japanese pillows. And I lolled my head back on a peanut butter jar. And during lunch break, I was just going to meditate. I fell asleep. And I thought, holy cow, that's the first time I've ever slept on my back. And after that, I found out by putting that jar behind my neck, I could go to sleep. And now I can easily sleep on my back or my belly or side or whatever. I prefer side sleeping, and there's a whole science of that. Wu Dag Chen teaches an entire class on how to sleep for different meridians. For the kidney meridian, you lie flat and you put your feet, both your what would you call the soles of your feet together while you sleep, and you do this for this meridian. And to conceive, you sleep a certain way. It was an amazing workshop I took on that. I forgot most of it, but it can be done. There is a science of how to work on yourself while you're sleeping.
That's awesome. Wow. What about peeing a lot at night? I've heard that's like excess cortisol, or it could be.
You know what it mostly is? It's a blocked colon. It's constipation.
Wow.
And by the way, I've worked myself up to about 9 bowel movements a day. So when doctors say it's normal to have 1 bowel movement a day or to have one every couple of days, don't believe them. Kellogg knew that. He calls it you're behind schedule. You're basically got a debt that's building up. You're supposed to be moving that stuff through. So we really are designed to have at least 3 bowel movements a day. Look at, one time I collected a whole bunch of animals to see how much they poop. Some of them poop 150 times a day in the insect world and things like that. But even a wild gorilla, and they go to the bathroom 8 or 9 or 10 times. They have a bowel movement. It's impractical for us when we only get a lot of people work and they get 2 breaks and a lunch, right? They're in trouble then if they keep going to the bathroom. But that's why we're designed to be free and work for ourselves, so we can poop when we want to poop and pee when we want to pee. But anyway, the urinary bladder is so big. Say it's the size of a balloon. What do you do when you put pressure on it and squeeze it up? It can only hold so much urine. So every time it fills up, you reach the capacity, you get the message that it's full. Yeah, because it's 1/10 of the size, so you go and pee. So the prostate gets blamed, chemicals get blamed, and usually it's completely physiologically physical by one force pressing on another force, and there being just so much room in the gut.
Wow. What are your thoughts on cannabis as a sleep aid? Someone asked.
I don't think it's really good as a sleep aid. I've got nothing against cannabis. I think when people are in high levels of stress, it can be beneficial. It seems to work on glaucoma and other things. I think we can do the same with meditation and things, but right now I'm living right next to the cannabis center of the universe, Carpinteria. All of those flower, what do you call them, greenhouses that they had, they're all converted because there's no money in flowers anymore. But now they have, golly, I forget how much money. Out of California alone, I think 90% of the pot comes from right here, right in Santa Barbara County. So it's amazing. I've used pot for nerves in small amounts. I think it's beneficial. But I really don't find a need for it. But if I was under severe stress, sometimes a toke or two help. And it can do a really strange thing. I may have told you this story before. One time I was a lens grinder, or polisher, one of the most boring jobs. So I was doing so badly, they told me, you're going to have to speed up or we're going to have to let you go. So I said, well, then I'm going to leave. And so I had to give 2 weeks notice, right, to be on good with them. So I started the morning by taking two tokes of dope, went to work, and then I went home for lunch and had 2 more. That's all I had. My productivity went up so much, I got called into the office after the 2 weeks, and he said, will you consider staying? We've never seen an employee improve so much. And I didn't tell him what I'd done. And I said, no, I'm really dedicated to moving on here to Texas at the time. And they said, well, if you ever want to come back, you got a job here. But I didn't tell them. It was just 2 tokes in the morning, 2 tokes at lunch. And it just made me, do that rote work. That's why when I was in the San Fernando Valley, it was well known that the druggiest place in the whole valley was the GM plant, because those auto workers didn't one part all day, drove me crazy. So it has its place. Yeah.
That's
You
hilarious.
can get too
Yeah.
much of it, and it can cause the lymphatic system damage. It can cause trouble conceiving if you want children. Long-time pot smokers should be careful, and it's bad for the lungs, just like cigarette smoke.
Yeah, I think it was from my talk with Georgie Dinkoff, or I heard this somewhere in Ray Pete sphere, that I found a Science Journal article that pregnenolone is increased by 1,500% with cannabis consumption, and that's like, I guess, a protective mechanism that the brain does. Is that pregnenolone is like a protective hormone. I find the hormonal effects fascinating, because I used to hear about estrogen in cannabis a lot, but I'd never heard of this pregnenolone thing. So maybe that balances out the estrogen. I don't know.
Yeah, it could. We also have a cannabinoid system in our brain that, but we can activate it ourselves too, because it's in our brain. We basically are our own pot plant.
I love it. This is a good question. Why does the need for sleep seem so much less significant when we're young?
When we're what?
When we're young, is it less trauma?
Oh, because we're enjoying ourselves more. Adult is an adulterated child. And think about it. How many adults are truly enjoying their life? Well, you're a kid. You basically, school's out, you get to play. In the summer, all we did was go out and play all the time. We didn't even know what work was. My parents were really lenient in that way. We didn't have to go, except for pick 1,000 crabgrasses out of the lawn each day. A few things like that, easily done. But we were always getting together to conspire to do some kind of either a practical joke, or go out in the woods, or dig up herbs and try them out of the ground because we read the pioneers did it, all kinds of things like that. So it really is interest. As people get old, they psychologically, particularly, they start to get in ruts, and a rut is not a good place to be. When you're in a rut, you phase yourself out. So many people die out of boredom, frankly. They just get bored. Even when they're working, they have a purpose, but then they retire and they don't know what to do because they haven't ever manufactured a purpose of their own. People like Ray Peter sticking around because he's always interested in something. If he's not thinking, he's painting. If he's not painting, he's doing something else. And so that kind of thinking keeps people young and needs less sleep. I had a job where I was in the clothing business, and it was so boring. I needed 10 hours of sleep and could barely get out of bed. Then I worked in a TV studio where it was all exciting, meeting all kinds of personalities and things like that, working the camera, doing the editing. I got by on 2 hours sleep. I loved it. I couldn't wait to wake up and go back to work. But if you have a job, oh God, I don't want to go back to work. Guess what? You're going to need more and more sleep. Or if you have a relationship that you really hate to wake up to that relationship in the same room, you're going to phase yourself out quicker and need a lot more sleep.
Those are great points. We had a lot of questions on sleep apnea. I guess that's a pretty common thing. Any recommendations for that?
Carbon dioxide. That's the main thing that helps that. Yeah, and learning to nose breathe too is important. I think it's overrated where it has to be, but really when you think about it, if you walk around with your mouth open, it looks retarded. And in fact, the Indian artist George Caton, he wrote a book about how mouth breathing was it was anathema to the Indian tribes. He painted in at least 40 different tribes. amazing that he never got killed or anything, but they wanted their portraits painted, so he did it. And he found that every one of those tribes, the mother, it was their duty to make sure that baby never opened their mouth, so that they were trained. They didn't have to use tape over their mouth or anything like Viteko often advises. They had to do it. And in one particular story I read, maybe out of Caitlin's book, maybe somewhere else, this small Indian got in a fight with a big white guy, and they were going to have a knife fight. And after they called off the fight, the Caitlin or whoever asked the Indian, "Weren't you afraid?" No, that guy had his mouth open. It's easy to beat him. Anyone with their mouth open, I can kick their butt basically. So really, if you go down, like we go to the farmer's market, and you'll see some people just walking around like this, with their mouth open, hanging open, and other people with their mouths closed. And I think it really does make a difference in consciousness, because the geometry of the face can actually increase your knowledge. Even moving the eyes up into the upward can do that. I had a Sufi teacher that used to be able to show completely open eyes white. He could rotate his pupils up to the top of his forehead. Adnan Sarhan, he just went on cosmic vacation recently in his high 80s.
Wow. I don't know if this is off topic, but you made me think of this. I guess it's a common belief in the scientific community that like men evolved beards to absorb punches to the jaw. You ever heard of that?
I missed that too. They evolved.
Oh, growing beards as like protection from being punched in the jaw. Have you ever heard that?
Could be.
I don't know if my friend that's an MMA fighter said that's actually a disadvantage to have a beard because it'll cut you if someone punches you. It increases the risk of injury. But, I don't know. I don't know if you'd have any thoughts on beards, but I don't know. What about restless legs? I think you might have talked about that in a previous episode, but is there a primary cause of restless legs?
Yeah, that's a trauma. When you think of it, if a person has restless legs, what are they thinking? I will go where the wild goose goes, that kind of thing. Which is best, a stationary heart or a heart at rest, whatever it was. Those kind of things. They actually show something psychological too. You may want to move on. It's like in studying body language. If you see you're talking to someone at the door and they have their feet turned away from you, they want to leave, but they're just trying to be polite and are not leaving. A lot of it is that, and a lot of it is simply that we're stuck in a brainwave again that could be in delta. You wouldn't have that phenomena. Those kind of phenomena are generated from alpha and theta and beta waves, particularly, that occur. One more thing about the other subject of sleep apnea, often bloat. Look at a big belly, and that will cause it. Simply by slimming down. What we call overweight and central obesity is really gas. It's gas pressure. Two ways. Some gases get and actually bloat the colon, and others get into the cell, like carbon dioxide, and expand the cell. A fat cell can expand 1,000 times, but no one asks what it can expand with. Since water is not compatible with fat, obviously it's going to be gas pressure that holds it in that level. And it doesn't necessarily have to be gas, but the gas pressure keeps the water from leaving, like an edema. And so most weight, you can actually yawn your weight away. And I've actually gained 10 pounds overnight by trauma and lost it by stuffing myself for an entire week to lose weight. So it has more to do with our breathing process and our trauma process than it does. But if a person has that central obesity, they're going to be prone to sleep apnea. There's just no getting around it.
Wow. That's interesting. Nightmares. I think you said ride it, right? It's a horse or something.
There's two types. There is an actual nightmare, and then there's a night stallion. The night stallion is actually called, or what do they have? They have a name for it. Basically, night terrors. Night terrors is what they call them. And they are in the delta state. It's a high yogic state that they can actually go into that world. It was delineated in a movie called Golden Child with Eddie Murphy. You remember that? He has a dream with a man with a knife, and he wakes up with a cut on his face. That's a night stallion, not a nightmare. So children, particularly because they're in that delta state much more than adults, they're much more prone to the night terrors. And also in that same delta state, you can sleepwalk, and your physiology is different. In the AMA journal, over 100 years ago, or maybe even 100 years ago or less, they reported the case of a man who was dying. He had everything wrong with him. He couldn't get out of his bed. So on a stormy night, they came back and he's not in his bed. So they wondered, what, did he commit suicide? What happened? Because they found a window open. So they couldn't find him. They looked below for the body. There was no body. The man, for 2 hours, walked around the ledge of the building over and over and over again all night, and then came back in the building, went back to bed under a total mesmeric state. So those states exist. Another man would walk all the time, sleepwalking. The wife followed him and saw him walking over a very thin log over a raging river, and she was afraid for his life, so she screamed. He woke up and fell in the river and drowned. If she just left him alone, he would have been in that other alternate state where you can do that. And indeed, so many cases, I wrote a book on mesmerism, are told of people who would wake up in the middle of the night, write letters and books, and you could even block their eyes, put something in between their vision, and were doing it in the dark, and they could still write the book under those pressures. So we have states of consciousness that we don't even dream of that they knew about over 100 years ago, when there were probably over 1,000 books written on mesmerism, and it was as well known as like Michael Jackson would be today. I mean, everyone knew what mesmerism was. Charles Dickens was a mesmerist. Lafayette was a mesmerist. There were all kinds of celebrities at that time that were actual mesmerists, and the doctors wanted to shut them down, which they did because it's free. If you can mesmerize a person and have a rash and make it go away by just saying, "Go away, rash," where's the money in that?
Is that how people walk on like hot coals? Are they in a delta state?
I think a lot of that is a trip on the way your sweat works in your foot. But when you stand in hot coals, that's a whole other story. Like you hear about the hunas in Hawaii walking across the lava beds and things like that. That's a little different than a cold. Yeah, the cold is done commonly. The Tony Robbins people do it. My friend Greg Whiteley and his entire group did it. And I'm the only one that hasn't done it, apparently. I think Vibrant Gal, didn't you do it? Walk on hot coals?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she did too. Sure. I'm the only one. I talk about all these states of consciousness and I don't do it. See?
Last night we watched an interesting documentary called The Hyena Men in Nigeria. They like travel on the streets with baboons, hyena, and like cobras. And they'll like put their head in the hyena jaw and like have the baboons hold the cobras. And they rely on a lot of like, I think, hypnotic states. They're using like potions, they say. And I thought
they say that mesmerism is really hypnotism, and where that you have to have suggestion, except it doesn't explain how you can rub a chicken's belly and have it totally hypnotized. And the American Indians, George Catlin again reported this, they go up to a buffalo and actually mesmerize the buffalo, and then they would just ride back to the corral 10 miles away, and the buffalo would follow them right into the corral. That's how they often caught buffalo. So we don't hear about that. We hear about, they're with spears and arrows and things like that. Indians were well versed in mesmerism, And many of the so-called settlers actually learned it from the Indians, is where they learned mesmerism too. Yeah, mesmerism was very powerful, and it's not just suggestion. There are states of consciousness. Well, partly is with, you've seen demonstrations of working up and down the meridian of a person, weakening and strengthening them. That's an example of mesmerism, and it can actually work thousands of miles away. Thousands of miles. So how do they explain such a thing? With something called biological vivaxis, I think is the name of it, where you actually align with the person at a distance and you have that effect. Our mind has ESP, clairaudience, clairsentience, all of these various clear sights and feelings, and we sell it short, and our science tends to deny it. And then what do? Self-fulfilling prophecy. It doesn't exist. Okay, it doesn't exist for me. I put myself in my own little box, and there I am. And when you're educated as a child to learn that kind of thing, you don't have the examples of many so-called primitive people who are 3 miles away and say, honey, I'm coming home with the caribou. Okay, dear, thank you, without any kind of smartphone.
No satellites required, right?
Yeah, so those kind of phenomena happen a lot. They happen to civilized people in short states and trauma. Like I had a girlfriend one time when she was a child. Her grandfather appeared at her bed in the middle of the night, so she ran in screaming and said, "My grandfather's at the bed." Said, "Oh, it's just a dream. Go back to sleep." The phone rings. The grandfather had just died. So there's a lot of. At one time, I was fascinated with those kind of stories. I researched it a lot before I ever found out about Edgar Cayce. When I was a child, I was fascinated with that world, and things like that exist that we can't explain.
Yeah, I've had so many experiences my whole life that it's impossible for me to say they don't exist. Like, especially the telepathic stuff. It's just so fascinating to me, and I think it's practical and useful. The people you trust, and it could help. So.
It really exists. One time my father came to me in a dream after he died and said, "I'll see you April 3rd." And I was terrified. I thought, wow, does that mean I'm going to die? I woke up in a sweat and I heard a voice. It was a voice stream, so very dramatic. So my mother had given me an astrology book, and because it didn't fit her, she got mixed up on her sign. And so I opened it, and when I opened to my sign, something fell out. And it was the cartoons I had drawn in the school newspaper that my dad had carried in his wallet. Now I'm really freaked out. So some months later, my wife comes back and said, "I'm pregnant again. The doctor says I'm due April 3rd. And I said, "Doing, it will be April 3rd, and it will be a boy." It was. My second son was born on April 3rd. So who knows whether that's a reincarnation of my dad or just some kind of synchronicity. But ESP definitely exists, and I certainly saw enough of it hanging around Wu Dang Chen and Adonal Lay and Adnan Sarhan and Rabbi Michael Shapiro. And these guys really do have something above and beyond.
Wow, we have to do an episode on that in the future. So ESP, extrasensory perception, is that kind of similar to mesmerism, kind of in the same category?
Yeah, very, very similar. Those states interact with each other. I've also met what I call minor wizards. I won't give this person's name. He's a good friend of mine, and sometimes we're at odds and sometimes we're not. But one time, he was driving as a passenger in my car, and I come to an intersection, and someone cuts me off, and I said, "This intersection is really bad. People cut you off." He said, "No, people always cut you off." I said, "People don't always cut me off. It's just one intersection they do." "No, they always cut you off." So we drive down on the short stretch of freeway and we get off. And I say, for instance, all the years I've been coming to this intersection, I've never been cut off. He puts his arms together and says, "Today you will." I said, "Fuck." So I pull up and another car pulls up and I start to go, and suddenly that car goes, screeches in front of me. I barely missed him by about 1 foot, hitting my brake as hard as I could. And that smart aleck just gloats at me. Now, what was that? What is that kind of thing? And I've seen many of them. I hung around with a guy called Street Wizard who could manifest I want a surfboard. He finds it on the freeway, the same model, brand new, falling off a car, I guess, and took it home with him. That kind of thing. I just seen too much of it to not believe in it.
And I guess where people encounter this really often is probably the medical diagnosis, right? When their doctor says, you have X, diabetes, heart disease, dementia, whatever. That's like a spell and kind of the same thing, right?
Fulfilling voodoo prophecy. Yeah, there's many stories of people, like one guy, the doctor said, oh, he has a galloping heart. Well, he meant it badly, but the guy said, well, I have a galloping heart. I'm better. And he had a miraculous cure. Another story out of Dr. Rodomon years and years ago, that he mixed up the prescriptions until one person he was dying and one person he was okay, and they got mixed up. And the guy who got the bad news but was healthy was dying, and they had to go find and correct it. And the other guy gave the good news, and he got healed too. So our minds make a huge difference on our health.
Absolutely. Well, Adam, this was awesome. We'll definitely have to do more episodes, keep this regular. I'm thinking one on teeth and dental too would be fun, because you wrote some books like Dead Dentists Don't Lie, right? I think.
Right. I'm hoping to grow a third set of teeth.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that the last few weeks, just randomly, like, because I know peptide injections are really popular now, and like you can inject ones that go right to your liver and reverse fat. I don't know, do different things.
Let me do something here. It's telling me to.
Oh.
Yep, I'm still here. There, it worked. It was telling me that. Are you still around? Yes, I'm still around. There's an example. Mostly it's considered tumors. Cancer is actually the secret. It actually is an incipient organ that is being designed to help us do things. Because when you look at many cancers, at the center of it will be a piece of hair or a piece of tooth. They don't tell you that. That is common to find that. So basically, it's like I call it cancer's evil twin, where the cancer cell actually is used to build things as well as not build them. And we build with cancer. That's what makes us grow. But when it becomes uncontrolled, then we can't. Eventually, just like we gain and lose other organs, we'll probably gain, according to Dr. Cole. No, Dr. What was his name? No, I'm not even thinking of his name, but Ray Peat talks about him all the time. He doesn't talk about the fact that this guy said that cancer was an incipient organ, his exact words.
Wow.
I may have to email you the name of that document.
That's interesting. Well, I want to do an experiment with eating a block of like hard cheese a day and seeing, because I've read some interesting articles on K2, especially the K27 form, on just what that can do for the teeth and gums and just epigenetics of the dentition. I bet that combined with some mind power and some intention could do a lot.
Yeah, physical exists, and ideally we want to use your physiological, your emotional, your cognitive, and your so-called spiritual, which really is your breath. How you control your breath has a lot to do with your health.
I love it. Well, thanks for your time, Adam, as always, and I'm sure we'll do it again soon. And stick around as we close out the show. Thanks so much.
Definitely. I'm glad you're out in the sun there at a higher place. That was a photograph on Facebook of you've got a lake right near there too, it looked like. Beautiful. Idaho
we just got
really beautiful places in it. Yeah.
Yeah, clean air, relatively clean water. I mean, as clean as you can get them, especially in the States.
State. I was going to move to Boise at one time, but it didn't come out because I picked the wrong time to go there when they were converting the the 2-year college to a 4-year university, and people were wandering the streets to find apartments and things. So I moved on to Nebraska, and then to Sioux City, Iowa, and then ultimately to Texas, where a lot of things happened for me. All fate, I guess.
Yeah. I've only been California and Idaho, so you've been all over.
Idaho's a beautiful place. Yeah, like my friend has land up there too, and I enjoy going up there to visit him. Been a while though, but I went up there about 3 times. I think just beautiful land.
Yeah, and there's a lot of
yeah,
there were just a mom black bear and her 2 cubs wandering around last night, and my neighbor, and there's like elk and moose, and we put out 2 salt licks so they go and lick it so we can see them from across the lake. And definitely have to carry our bear spray out here for sure.
Yeah, I had a moose run about 8 feet away from me, running with its child, whatever you call it, behind it. Yeah.
Wow.
I was told to be careful with that, though. They get pretty aggressive with their children.
Yeah, I've heard from some people that have lived here a while, the moose can be more dangerous than the bears oftentimes.
Yeah, I've heard that. In fact, my friend Greg has a buddy up there that goes and talks to the bears and pets them and everything like that. So my friend Greg said, "Did you see the video of that guy who would fish with bears and finally the bear ate him? So you better be careful." Yeah, I think the brown bears are less aggressive than the black bears. And anyway, he would hang out with the bears, and he had no problem up there in Idaho.
Wow. Yeah, I was always fascinated by that. People that could do that. And I think starting young tends to help if they were like grow up with like a baby. I've heard multiple stories. Like there's a documentary, a guy doing that with like a crocodile, and he ended up like cuddling with this crocodile that was, who knows, 14, 16, 20 feet long. He's just like playing with it in the water as it's full grown.
Even a guy that lived with hyenas, which is one of the most dangerous, violent animals at all. You can live with lions. You've seen those videos of the guy with the lion. He was separated for a year and it ran at him and hugged him out of the jungle. So anyway, interesting.
I love it. Well, thanks, Adam, and stick around as I close out the show. It's always fun.
Thanks a lot for having me, Matt.
Well, that's it for today's show. I always learned so much from Adam. I found it fascinating when we were talking about the sleep chronotypes, and he was talking about the owl or the lark, and the time that you were born determines if you're basically a night owl or morning person. And I thought that was really interesting that he says early to bed, early to rise doesn't make good astronauts. I also found it fascinating when he said that snoring is not always a bad thing, that snoring for a certain type can be a sign of being in a high delta state, which is the deepest. Well, unless you go to Omega, which he says burning the book and throwing it away. But Delta is 0 to 4 cycles as far as mainstream science talks about. And I thought that was fascinating because I thought snoring was always a bad thing, and it means that oxygen is not getting to the brain. So that's the first time I've heard that one. Over the last 10, 11 years, I've experimented with so many different with sleeping under pyramids, 9 pyramids, a huge pyramid, sleeping on different magnets, inclined bed therapy, eating different ways before bed, not eating, fasting, doing different macronutrients, restricting different things. I've tried a lot of different combinations in my experiments to find what gives me the best sleep. And it's kind of funny to come full circle and go back to what I did when I was a kid, which was enjoy a big bowl of ice cream. And it doesn't have to be big, but let's just say a bowl of ice cream before bed, because that's what I did growing up and it worked. And then once I learned about natural health, they said, stop because the sugar creates oxidative stress and blah, blah, blah. And it's inflammatory and it's going to act as a stimulant. And they never told me that sugar is not a stimulant. It's actually the exact 180 reverse. It's a sedative. Sugar is a sedative. Carbohydrates are a sedative. They aren't a stimulant. And you can use them to calm your body down, calm your mind down, to be able to go to sleep, and actually to not wake up in the middle of the night stressed because you ran out of fuel. Because to sleep, it takes energy. People don't think about that. To heal the body, you need energy. Where does the energy come from? Well, it comes from the stored sugar in the liver called glycogen. And that is like your battery pack. And there's some in the muscle as well. But the liver is the main reservoir, as far as I know. And that is where you actually get your energy throughout the night. And so that means if you're on the intermittent fasting thing, you're on the OMAD thing, you're on keto, you're not eating in a balanced way, you fell for one of these fad lifestyles, then that means that you're going to bed with an empty tank. And your body will start eating itself to get sugar. And they tell you that's a good thing in alternative health. They say gluconeogenesis and they say autophagy, and they cite all of these studies in mice, and they say you're going to live longer and all the blood isn't going to your intestines and yada, yada, and blah, blah, blah. And it's all BS because it's not human physiology. We're going off studies where we're using backup systems. We're trying to cheat the body. We're trying to cheat the system and utilize an alternative fuel source as our main source of fuel. It just doesn't make sense. When I learned in college nutrition 101 that glucose is the primary fuel of the body, that doesn't change unless you ascend to another dimension or something like that. Glucose is the primary fuel of the cell. And the cells need energy to perform all of their functions and to maintain their structure, as Albert St. George said. And so to take that away and force the body to eat its muscle, to eat its fat, to get energy, there are going to be consequences. And these people that use the buzzwords autophagy, and they never talk about lipofuscin and the lysosome and what that does to autophagy, it's not a good thing, can't work. And they talk about gluconeogenesis, but they never, ever talk about the side effects of poking the liver and say, hey, perform gluconeogenesis day in and day out, over and over, one meal a day, just steaks, no sugar. It's insane. And at extreme level, you have a liberation of inflammatory amino acids from the muscles, tryptophan, cysteine, methionine. These three suppress the metabolism. They suppress the metabolic rate. They suppress thyroid function, thyroid transport, transthyretin, so thyroid transporting hormone. They affect all these different systems that have a net effect of slowing the entire system down, slowing the heart rate, and lowering the body temperature. This is why the average human body temperature is trending south. It's not 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit anymore. It's actually going lower. Like 97.6 is the average. And that's kind of a scary thing because now we have Candida, which is a new thing. Now we have Epstein-Barr, which the medical medium's talking about. We have all of these conditions that are like buzz conditions that get people emotional, and they identify with their condition and they identify as having Lyme disease or Epstein-Barr or Candida or osteoporosis or whatever it is, where it could just be a metabolic issue. And it most likely is because you've starved yourself. You've restricted a macronutrient like sugar / carbohydrate. You've been skipping breakfast like I did for 4 years straight. That's going to mess up the system quite a bit. And you don't just come back into balance in a week of starting eating breakfast again and eating sugar and protein with every meal frequently. And it really is that simple. I don't think it's necessary to work with a practitioner to join a program. If you need that, if you don't have the time, if you're overwhelmed, go for it. I recovered on my own just by researching, listening to podcasts like this one. And that's actually why I started this podcast, because I looked at all the podcasts out there and they're all saying, for the most part, starve yourself. And that creates an industry. It's called the keto industry. And there's a lot of characters in this industry selling mineral supplements that you get depleted in when you starve yourself. And they're selling their keto programs. And in the end, it just brings more people to me into this metabolic community, because the crash is inevitable. You will crash, and it's not going to be pretty, and you need to take off work, and it's a whole thing. I went through it, pretty much almost died, and came back from the brink of death using sugar and using animal protein, because I was pretty much a sugar restricting, animal protein restricting vegan for quite a while, and off and on for several years. That is the worst possible thing to do. And then from there, people will rebound and bounce to another extreme, which is the carnivore diet, which is trending right now, which is, maybe some fruit, but never any white sugar, because that's the devil, because it's energy without nutrients, and we can't have energy without nutrients because that's going to harm the system. Why? I don't know. That's just what they say, right? When in fact, sugar is just sucrose. It's 50 fructose, 50 glucose, 50% split, glucose, fructose, no nutrients. Is that a toxin? No. Our body will actually run on that as a fuel, especially if you have minerals coming in, if you're eating in a balanced way, if you have animal protein coming in from eggs, from red meat, from cheese, from milk, then it could actually benefit the system. And there aren't many people talking about that. Adam Bergstrom, the reason why I have him back on the show, one of the many reasons, is his information on sugar is incredible. And a lot of people will message me and say, Adam just has anecdotes. He doesn't cite a lot of research. He does have a lot of newsletters. If you go to his page, solartiming.com, he has ebooks, full ebooks, and then a bunch of mini ebooks. And he does cite a lot of research in these books. He has one called Acidify or Die. He actually told me after the interview that people should eat a lot of protein to acidify the body, because nitrogen acidifying after surgery to heal. I thought that was really interesting. So this information on even the whole acid alkaline thing is so contrary to what you hear in the alternative health community. It's pretty awesome. His information on colors really blows my mind. He has a book called Color Recycling, a prismer of the hues and hues, spelled Hues and hues. And he's really into trauma and the colors associated with trauma, and using colors to heal, which I find fascinating. This goes kind of beyond your average like chromotherapy. Some people will just shine lights on their wrist, or put a light on in their sauna. This is a little beyond that, and he actually recommends wearing specific colors throughout the week, like actually Roy G. Biv throughout the week, starting on Monday and ending on Sunday. And I've been experimenting with it and definitely feel something from it. There's definitely an effect that you can't deny, like scientifically, from colors, even cotton on your skin. Like you just think like, oh, wearing a colored t-shirt. Like I grew up wearing black a lot when I was young, and it has an effect physiologically on the body with the colors that you choose to wear, 1,000%. And I'm really excited to watch that kind of awareness spread in the coming years that definitely the colors we wear matters, especially in specific contexts. If you have a heart condition, if you're healing from a specific condition, I believe that colors are radically underutilized, and we need to pay more attention to colors in general and how we let them into our life. Because we'll focus on feng shui and painting the walls a certain color, but what about putting the colors on our skin, on our body? Makes a world of difference in our emotions, our physical health, our mental health. It's pretty cool. So Adam got me really excited about that, and so I've been experimenting with that for a little bit. So check out his website, solartiming.com. You can support Adam's work by purchasing his ebooks. They're all awesome, especially the yellow fat disease ones and the yellow fat disease compendium. So that's $100, and you get over 275 pages of all of his writings on degenerative lipofuscinosis. And Adam calls it the parent disease of Alzheimer's disease, frontotemporal dementia, Huntington's disease, glaucoma, macular degeneration, Lou Gehrig's, vascular dementia, all different kinds of dementia, brown atrophy of the heart, cardiac necrosis, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is funny. I actually just saw a YouTube video by a alternative health educator, and she was talking all about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but no mention of yellow fat disease, no mention of iron overload, and no mention of PUFA overload. And it's really funny that fatty liver disease can be talked about without the context of lipofuscin and polyunsaturated fatty acids being stored in excess amounts and reacting with the iron, and iron is like handing it a machine gun, and it just goes off, creating these omega-3 barcodes, as Adam Bergstrom calls it. There's also waxy liver disease. The name of conditions it's really funny because there's just a million names of conditions, right, of health conditions. And everyone gets so emotional if you don't know about their condition. Oh, I can't believe you've never heard of XYZ. How have you never heard of XYZ? Well, they create hundreds of new conditions, every month, probably every week. And it's impossible to keep up with all these crazy names. And could it be simpler than the medical mafia pharmaceutical cartel tells us? Could it be more simple than trying to memorize a zillion, billion, quadrillion different names of diseases and just calling it one thing, the disease, and just saying, okay, I'm sick and now I'm going to heal, instead of saying I have X, I have Y, right? And then making it really, because as soon as you identify your condition with some crazy name that's 3 or 4 words long or it's hard to pronounce, that's like a spell. It's like a magical spell that the doctor casts on you. And it makes your life more complicated just with those words, just with those magic words that they put on you as like a curse. And so you have to shed that curse and just say, okay, it's the disease, simplify, look how you grew up. I knew how I grew up. I grew up in San Diego, California, going to Mexican restaurants 5 days a week, eating yoga mat bread from Subway and Quiznos pretty much 2-3 days a week. I ate out most of the time with my friends. What did they cook all of the food in? It wasn't coconut oil. It wasn't ghee. It wasn't lard. It wasn't tallow. My entire freaking childhood, I was mega dosing vegetable oils. Those are just words, but when you actually digest that idea, wow, okay, 25 years of mega dosing, because my parents didn't know too. So I was mega dosing them at home as well. Mega dosing vegetable oils. That's going to take some time. No wonder everyone has the disease. No wonder everyone has XYZ, crazy names, 5-letter, 5-word names of health conditions. No wonder, right? A lot of us were raised the same way. And unless you were raised on a farm, which I would guess 5% of the population, maybe less than 1%, because most of us, like you listening, you're probably raised on a factory farm like myself. You're raised on a human factory farm and you were farmed for pharmaceuticals. That's what you were farmed for. And if you made it this far without getting hooked by the cartel's game, then you were very lucky. And it was 100% luck because you didn't know, your parents didn't know, and it was a slow kill that was invisible to your senses because you can't see, feel, hear, or touch iron overload or lipofuscin until you've been taking Kirkland Signature Costco fish oil for 50, 60 years, and you look on your forehead and it looks like Jack Cruz's forehead, the neurosurgeon, that's really smart about brain health, but can't see all of the age spots on the face, those brown spots, the age pigment, the terminal toxin. No one's talking about it. Besides a few people, Ray P., Adam Bergstrom. It's really surprising because it's right in front of our face, literally. You go to the store, you look at an old person, you look at their forehead, you look at their forearms, you on their skin that's exposed to the most ultraviolet light, and you see these brown spots. Those are new. We didn't have those before, just like there are new streaks in the sky when you look up and you see these streaks throughout the sky. Those are new. What else is new? These spots on people's forehead. And we have to start to ask, what's causing that? It blows my mind that it's not talked about more because we can see it. It's not something you need to study. It's not something you need to go and get a test for. You go to the airport, you go to the health food store, and you observe people. This is a very underrated form of study, just observation, just watching the destruction of humanity. You don't need a double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical study to show you that people are dying of lipofuscin and that most elderly people are going to go down not being able to recognize themselves in the mirror, let alone their family. They're going to forget their own name. They're going to forget their daughter's name. And it's really sad because it's 1,000% preventable. It is preventable. And the first step is noticing it, is saying, wow, okay, obviously yellow fat disease leads to various types of dementia. Like here, Adam Bergstrom says mixed dementia, vascular dementia. There's, again, a million words for each condition, right? A million variations of each condition. But to simplify it, you could just say yellow fat disease equals neurodegeneration. And when you realize that, you have to laugh and look at these neurosurgeons and these brain docs running brain scans, and they all have receding hairlines, which you got to scratch your head and say, why does a brain doc have a receding hairline? I don't care how old you are. Why is your hair receding? And why do you have lipofuscin in the same exact location where your hair is receding? Gotta wonder. It's a simple observation. And if you want to research the truth about PUFAs, I'd highly recommend checking out Adam's books, especially if you're a doctor or if you work with doctors and you want to be part of this really revolution in understanding health in a different way, because it took me a while to catch up with Adam. I heard about him years ago when I was selling algae oil and I was taking it myself and I didn't believe him. I'm like, wow, he's just a contrarian. I just brushed him off. And then years later, I started to feel the effects and see the effects of high intake omega-3s in people and see how hard it was pushed and see really the profit behind it and the darkness in the industry. And that really woke me up to the reality that, wow, this is like the dark side's fuel. It's like omega-3s. It's like that's how they're taking people out. It's a lube job. And we need an oil change, but more than that, we need vitamin E, in my opinion. We need Shilajit, and we need to kind of take a multi-pronged approach to it. It's one thing to reduce your PUFA intake, and that really helps. It's another thing to eat saturated fat, and that really helps. And if you just don't do those two things, that'll help. But taking vitamin E, Shilajit, which chelates excess iron, getting your bioavailable copper from beef liver and oysters, which regulates iron, all of this really helps to reverse the condition. And if you want to look up the scientific terms for the products of PUFA decomposition or PUFA degradation, you can look up acrolein, Acrolein, which is a cancer-causing compound that is a breakdown product of omega-3 fatty acids. And there's some hard to pronounce ones, hydroxyzononenal, ethane, pentane, neuroprostans, a lot of aldehydes, which are alcohol-like compounds. But I just recommend purchasing his ebooks and the Yellow Fat Disease books because they're really helpful to understand what's going on. And as always, if you want to support me and the show, you can go to matt-blackburn.com. I have my recommended products up there. I have my featured products on the front page. My favorite salt, my favorite wild oregano, collagen, blue blocking glasses. I have the methylene blue lozenges that are really good. And a couple new products I threw up on the site in the last few weeks. The AirTube headphones, and these are actually from Defender Shield. They're slightly smaller, so for someone with a slightly smaller head, it's more comfortable. I have a pretty big head, so it doesn't fit very well for me, so probably just the non-wraparound headphones would be better for someone like that. And a guest I had on the show before were the owners of Fancy Farm Skincare. And this is a really cool company. It's tallow-based skincare products. So they have face creams. They recently came out with a vitamin E eye repair. So you put it on the side of your eyes where people get crow's feet and wrinkles. And it's a combination of grass-finished organic suet tallow, Bulgarian rose oil, and vitamin E. They also just came out with a lip balm, like a chapstick that I really enjoy, that's made of ghee, tallow, honey, beeswax, and vitamin E. Just very simple. A lot of these products are getting harder to find in the health food store because I go to the checkout and I'm always looking at the products they have there at the end when you have all your stuff and they're trying to catch you with the last things there at the store. And I'm looking at the ingredients of these chewing gums and of all these different products. And there's always a few ingredients in there that I know are not ideal and that they could do better. And so I always encourage people to order their products online. There's some things you can get in the health food store. And if it's last minute and you need it right then, it's great. But for the most part, it's better to buy your supplements and your health products online and stock up. And that way you don't have to worry about, getting sick from something that's supposed to help you from the health food store, which is highly possible. It's happened to me multiple times buying supplements from the health food store just because of titanium dioxide or whatever they choose to put in the capsule with the product. And you could also go to Mitolife.co. That's my brand, Mitolife. Limited supply runs of the Panacea Shilajit tablets. Those are really popular. Those come back in stock at least once a week. So just keep an eye on the website. daily if you've been waiting for it, and that should come back. The NAD power should be back really soon. That's the niacinamide, and it's a NAD booster. NAD stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, and it's an enzyme that is required to produce ATP, or cellular energy. And nicotinamide or niacinamide has been shown in clinical studies to be neuroprotective, to actually reduce altered pigmentation in the skin, wrinkles, sebum production, which is largely responsible for development of acne. It actually is an internal sunscreen. It protects against UV light-induced skin damage. And what's really cool is it decreases prostaglandin synthesis and inhibits the release of free fatty acids. So these are two things that are related to PUFA, or polyunsaturated fatty acids, in that vegetable oil thing I was talking about earlier. So vitamin E and niacinamide together are synergistic, and they're very protective, either when you're consuming PUFAs. Like, I love a burger and fries. They cook my fries in peanut oil. I don't sweat it. I just take my supplements that day, and I just live my life, and I enjoy it. But to mitigate in the moment, or to recover from previous exposure to a high PUFA diet, or to omega-3 supplements like algae oil, or to a lot of vegetable oils, which are all synonymous, canola oil is synonymous with fish oil, then you can use vitamin E and niacinamide. And that's what I used several years ago. It was about 3 years ago, to recover from the extreme lifestyle that I was living, when I thought that I was on the pinnacle of anti-aging protocol and lifestyle, when in fact I was doing everything to actually accelerate aging. And I'll probably put some pictures together, because people have told me that I definitely have reversed aged. And I've gone through phases of aging really fast and then regressing. And you could see it in my face, just the swelling and different things. And so it's sometimes just a matter of looking at the body and just being real with how it looks, with inflammation and with the condition of the skin, and then changing. If you're anti-supplement, you might want to add in supplements. If you've been taking the wrong ones, you might want to switch it up, and just kind of altering until you get the results that you desire. So thanks so much for listening. New episode every Friday, commercial free, except at the end when I just talk about Mitolife and products that I like. And I'll definitely back on probably to talk about ESP, hypnotizing and mesmerism. He's written a lot of books on that, and just weird stuff. I've had interesting experiences in my life that I'm curious his take on. And I'll see you guys next week. Stay supercharged.